you're about to give in the matter now pending before the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay, if you could have a seat and introduce yourself to the jury.
Certainly. My first name is Stephen, S-T-E-V-E-N. My last name is Atkinson, A-T-K-I-N-S-O-N.
Dr. Atkinson, where do you work?
I am employed by the state of Georgia. I work for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation at the medical examiner's office there. I am a forensic pathologist, also known as a medical examiner.
Excuse me. Are you licensed to practice medicine in the state of Georgia?
Yes.
Can you please tell the jury your educational background, what led you to the job that you're in now?
Certainly. My education, training, and experience is as follows. I received a bachelor's degree from Georgia Tech in Atlanta in 1996. I then received an MD from the Medical College of Georgia in Augusta, Georgia in 2000. For the next 5 years, I completed an anatomic and clinical pathology residency at the University of Florida in Gainesville. For the next year, 2005 to 2006, I completed a pathology fellowship at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. For the next year, 06 to 07, I was in private practice doing hospital-based pathology in Macon, Georgia. And then for the next year, 07 to 08, I completed a forensic pathology fellowship at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. So upon completion of that fellowship at Emory, I began my employment with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation in 2008, and I've been there ever since as a forensic pathologist.
Can you please describe to the jury what does a forensic pathologist do, and what is pathology?
Well, pathology literally means the study of disease. So most pathologists work in hospitals looking at biopsies or anything that's been removed in the OR or in the clinical lab. So when you have a blood draw, there's going to be a pathologist supervising the lab. Forensic pathology is a subspecialty of anatomic pathology, and a forensic pathologist performs autopsies. We are called upon to determine the cause and manner of death on people who have died. In the state of Georgia, if someone dies through violent means or under unknown circumstances, the coroner takes jurisdiction of the body and can certainly call upon a forensic pathologist to further examine that body and examine the body, which is what we do at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation.
You mentioned some training earlier. What does training consist of for pathology?
Well, to be a pathologist, you certainly need to graduate from college, graduate from medical school, and then after medical school, you complete a residency program, which is either in anatomic pathology or clinical pathology, or the vast majority are combined anatomic and clinical pathology, which is what I did. So once a residency in anatomic and or clinical pathology has been completed, then that person can certainly go out and practice independent pathology. Forensic pathology is just a small subspecialty that very few pathologists specialize in.
And do you complete continued education in this field?
Yes, I do.
Can you explain that to the jury? How many hours and what types of trainings?
In order to maintain a Georgia medical license, a licensee needs to complete at least 40 hours of continuing medical education every 2 year cycle. I am certainly board certified in anatomic pathology, clinical pathology, and forensic pathology. And in order to maintain that board certification with the American Board of Pathology, I need to have 70 hours every 2 year cycle to maintain the board certification.
What are your duties as a forensic pathologist?
As a forensic pathologist, we are a consultant to coroners throughout the state of Georgia. If a body falls under a coroner jurisdiction, then that coroner can decide that that but that may be the rib piece with a bullet in it. But we took it out separately and then took some additional photographs. And we did not remove the bullet because we wanted to present that all to Dr. Gooding, the forensic anthropologist.
Okay, another bag.
This is one of the 3 bags again with the same description with the yellow tag with the unique number.
And that's GBI ME 14. Okay, now we're on 15.
Right. Rather than a cardboard box for that one body bag, these actually were brown paper bags within the overall body bag. So we took pictures of the brown paper bags as they were received, and now we're going to take pictures of what is the contents of these brown paper bags.
Okay. And GBI ME 16, GBI ME 17.
That same description, more of the same. We're just documenting photographically what was received.
All right, and then in GBI ME 18, is this the bag and then what was inside the bag?
That is correct.
Okay. What are those? Do we even know what those fragments may come from? How do you determine that?
These are just small fragments of bones and a little bit of soft tissue. We were able to save a portion of skeletal muscle to submit as evidence, but again, the forensic anthropologist, she was able to separate each one and say, these are skull bones, these are vertebral bones, these are rib bones, these are pelvic bones, these are long bones. But sometimes when you get to the bones in the ankles and the wrists and the hands and the feet, sometimes it's very difficult to tell because the burning has changed what they originally looked like.
All right, GBI ME 19, another bag.
More of the same, yeah. The quadrant B and E-4, some of these markings had to do with the scale of that was marked out at the scene. So if somebody wanted to say, well, what part of the fire pit was this bone found in, or what part of the fire pit was this piece of muscle found in, she could go back and tell that. But yeah, as far as the forensic pathologist, this is just the markings on the bag. So we're documenting that these fragments came in this bag, and the markings of the bag were this. And this clearly looks like a long bone that's been burned with some attached skeletal muscle here.
And that's GBI ME 20. Okay, going to 21.
Same description, yes.
Looks like almost the same photo. Okay, 22. Another bag.
Another bag, yes.
Okay.
And same description. Burned fragments of bones and soft tissue. You can see there's black areas and white areas, and it's certainly consistent with a body that has been burned in a fire pit.
And then 24, unopened.
Same description.
25,
and same description. Just different markings on the brown paper bag.
Now, is this another possible long bone with muscle?
That's exactly what that is. Yes, long bone with muscle.
And when we say long bone, what is that? What could you be referring to?
We're talking about bones in the arms and the legs. So the humerus, the radius, the ulna, the femur, the tibia, and the fibula. Those are going to be your long bones.
Okay. And this is GBI ME 26. What are we looking at here?
This was the fragment. You can see there's 2 ribs and a bullet. So we kind of try to turn it and get all different perspectives showing where the bullet was and where the ribs were.
And is this the bullet right here, the red?
Yes, it
item?
is. This is a little out of focus. It looks like the camera is focusing on the 3-inch ruler behind the behind the tissue fragment, but you can certainly see the bullet, which is pointing back towards the camera, and that way you could estimate it you could call it a medium caliber jacketed bullet just by looking at it in this photograph.
And that's GBI ME 27. I want to walk through a little bit of your report. So when you are conducting your autopsy, where do you get the background information from scene recovery?
All of the information comes to us from the coroner, and in this case it was Coroner Sally Sims. So Coroner Sally Sims is essentially the customer or who we were writing the report for. So Miss Sims is at the scene. She's the one talking to police. She's the one getting the investigative information from the police. So she's going to report that information to our office.
So I want to go to page 2 of your report, down towards skeletal analysis. You have it divided into a couple of sections here: skeletal inventory, trauma analysis, and peri-mortem trauma. So what are you concluding under skeletal inventory?
Okay, let me just preface this by saying the dashed line at the top of page 2 through the dashed line at the mid portion of page 3. This is verbatim from Dr. Gooding's anthropology report. Since Dr. Gooding's anthropology report was crucial to the, quote, autopsy findings, in the skeletal analysis.
Judge, I object, and that's hearsay. That's not his report. He's copy and pasted another expert's report into his report, so that expert needs to testify about what that is.
That's fine, Judge. We'll move on. It's already, the report's admitted.
Right. He can testify as to other reports he uses in reaching his conclusions.
As an expert, yes, Judge. Okay, so did Dr. Gooding's report assist in your conclusions in your report?
Yes, it did.
Okay, so going to the skeletal inventory, what does that mean under Dr. Gooding's section?
Basically, what Dr. Gooding stated was that the remains represented one individual. There were no duplicate bones. For example, if she found 2 right humeruses or humeri, then she would say, at minimum, we have 2 individuals. So looking at all the remains that we have just gone through in all of the state's 1 through 27 photographs, if somebody says, I think this is 10 people buried or in this fire pit, what Dr. Gooding is saying is, well, we have no duplicates, so, it represents one individual because there's no duplicates. There's no reason to believe this represents 2 people or 3 people or 4 people at this point.
And was that consistent with your observations of the remains?
Yes, it was.
And then moving down to the peri-mortem trauma, it discusses the projectile found.
Yes, and like I say, you've still got the picture on the TV screen.
Yes.
And this is a bullet within that's lodged in one of the fragments. So, as an anthropologist or as a pathologist, we can say that this Mr. Farris was shot at least one time. Could he have been shot more than that? Of course, because bullets can exit. Could there have been some other skeletal trauma that was not noticed because of the fire distorted and made that trauma unavailable for us as the examiner to see? Absolutely. Can you get shot and not have any bone trauma? Of course, you can get a gunshot wound that only hits soft tissue. But what we know is what we can see in the remains. So from these remains, there's at least one gunshot wound, and this is going to be the end of the pathway. I clearly state out in my report that the entrance wound cannot be found, the pathway of what exact organs it hit cannot be found, and the range of fire cannot be assessed because there's no way to assess for stippling or things like that when we don't have any skin to examine with an entrance wound.
And when you say stippling, I know we don't have that in this case. Is that just a way to determine how close the shooter was?
That is correct, yes.
And so her conclusion about the location of the projectile is, did you also conclude that same location with your observations of the bullet here on the screen?
Right. As we saw from the previous photograph, you saw the 2 ribs, so you know the gunshot wound is in the torso somewhere.
And then I'd like to go down to the summary, your summary of findings. You've already covered some of this, but it states that you were unable to assess for the entrance wound.
That is correct.
and the range of fire, which you just described, and the direction of the wound path. Can you describe that to the jury, the wound path?
Certainly. Typically, when we autopsy someone who has been shot, we're able to say, here's the entrance wound, and then we assess for soot and stippling. Clearly, there's soot everywhere because he's been in a fire pit. So we say where exactly on the body the entrance wound is. The entrance wound, we're going to assess for soot and for stippling to see if it's intermediate or close or contact range. Then we're going to assess where it went. So a typical gunshot wound may go through, for example, a typical gunshot wound of the torso may involve the skin and soft tissue of the chest. It may involve a rib. It may involve one or both lungs. It may involve the heart. It may involve the spine. It may involve the spinal cord. There's lots of things that a bullet could hit in the torso. And then the final thing we're going to say is there an exit wound or is there a bullet? So it's half the gunshot wounds we autopsy and we describe exit, half don't. And the final thing we'll say when we describe a gunshot wound is the direction. Is it front to back? Is it left to right? Is it upward, downward? We'll always try to describe it in a three-dimensional direction using up, down, right, left, front, back with the body in anatomic position. So sometimes that can help the police investigators try to get the position of the body when the gunshot wound was sustained, but certainly at autopsy we can't determine the position of the body when the gunshot wound was sustained, even if we know the direction through the body with the body in anatomic position.
And then under your comment and opinion, you state there was extensive postmortem thermal damage, which made further characterization of this gunshot wound difficult. Is that essentially what you just described?
That is correct, yes.
And the reasoning for that. And then your job is to determine cause and manner of death. Can you describe what cause of death means to the jury?
Certainly. Cause of death can be anything listed based on the autopsy findings coupled with the police investigation. Go ahead.
You were going to move on to manner of death, I imagine.
Well, I was going to move on to manner of death, and there's basically 4 manners of death for a death certificate, and each death can be categorized as one of those 4, and I'll list those as follows: natural death, accidental death, homicide, or suicide, and they're basically self-explanatory. A natural death is a death through disease process. An accidental death is something that is inadvertent and untoward and unexpected. If you fall off a ladder and hit your head and die of head trauma, that would be an accidental death. Homicide and suicide, or death at the hands of another, is homicide, and then death at your own hands is suicide. If for some reason you cannot put it into one of those 4 categories, you could certainly use undetermined or pending investigation or something of that nature. But here in this case, I listed the manner of death as homicide because we had police investigation that there was no evidence that this was a natural death. There was no evidence that this was an accidental death, and there was no evidence that this was a suicidal death. So it was apparent that he was shot by another individual. Therefore, we relayed to the coroner to sign the death certificate as cause of death, gunshot wound of torso, and manner of death, homicide, because that was the reasonable conclusion to make given the facts that we had.
Thank you, Doctor. You testified earlier that you did not remove this projectile?
That is correct. We left it in there for Dr. Gooding to remove during her further examination. So Dr. Gooding helped with the recovery at the scene. Then we got the body, which is where all the pictures were taken. And then Dr. Gooding got to examine the remains again in a controlled setting, with adequate light on a table in a laboratory, because it's a whole lot easier to remove or to examine the remains in a controlled laboratory setting rather than out in the field when I believe the fire was still smoldering.
Your Honor, at this time the state would move to admit State's Exhibit GBI ME-28, which is the bullet from the fragment.
Right, any objection? All right, Smith.
Dr. Atkinson, that's all I have for you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Good afternoon, Dr. Atkinson. My name's Michael Ray. I represent Ms. Farris. You're a day early, so I don't have my questions printed.
Can you repeat that?
I was just saying that you're a day early, so I don't have my questions printed out for you. So give me just 1 sec, okay? So, you can't tell me, as the medical examiner, whether or not Gary Farris died as a result of a gunshot wound to the heart, can you?
There was no heart available for examination. Yeah, I've made it clear that the pathway, the entrance wound, is unable to be assessed due to all of the post-mortem thermal damage.
So you can't say that any vital organ in Gary Farris's body was hit by a bullet? Yes or no?
That is correct.
Okay, because you can't tell me where the bullet went in, it didn't go out, and you can't assess the pathway of the bullet, right?
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay. All right. Now, you also, on direct, you have stated that y'all consulted with numerous experts, correct?
Yeah, that is correct. We consulted with Dr. Gooding, the forensic anthropologist, for examination of the bones, and then we consulted with Dr. Gordon Frazier for forensic odontology consultation, who confirmed using dental records and the remains that this was indeed Mr. Farris.
Okay. And is that the only two experts that you spoke to?
I believe those are the only two consultations that our office did. That is correct.
Are there any other medical examiners at the TBI?
Yes.
How many?
Currently, there are 15 medical examiners statewide, and we have 3 offices, one in Metro Atlanta, one office in Macon, and one office in Savannah.
Okay. Did any of those other medical examiners look at these remains?
That's a difficult question to answer, because the follow-up would be, well, who looked at it? So in our normal course of business, we have an autopsy suite that is open. We have 8 stations, and there's typically up to 3 medical examiners performing autopsies at once. And we also have forensic pathology rounds where other doctors will see what else is going on in the lab. So potentially everyone in the office that was there that day would have seen these remains. That is correct.
Okay. Well, and you just said something interesting. You said this day. So did your examination of these remains take a day?
The actual examination of the remains and taking the photographs, yes, that was all done in one day.
Okay. Did you take those photographs?
Like I mentioned to the counselor earlier, we have a forensic photographer in our office, so these photographs were taken under my supervision at my direction.
So the answer is no, but you were there.
That is correct.
All right. And what day were these photographs taken and the remains reviewed by you?
I'm going to refer to my autopsy report. That would have been on July 6th, 2018.
Okay. 2018. So on that day, you did the photographs and you looked at it, right?
That is correct.
Okay. Then why did it take till June 12th, 2019 to issue your report?
Again, typically we're going to wait until the final police investigation, and it took an extra few weeks to get him ID'd, his ID confirmed, and that's an average turnaround time. That appears to be 9 to 10 months, which that's not uncommon for a complicated case. That's par for the course.
You had the forensic dental stuff. You had that by July, right? 2018?
I believe Dr. Frazier's report, which I did bring with me, his report was dated November 8th, 2018.
Okay, so you had it at least by November.
That is correct.
But didn't you also just receive like a letter from the dental forensic people saying, hey, I think this is Gary Farris?
We have I'm looking at the dates on these, and it looks like the forensic anthropology report was dated May 31st, 2019. So it looks like my report came out like 2 weeks after the forensic anthropology report came out.
Okay, that's not what I asked you, though. I asked you about the dental stuff. Like, did you
Okay.
get a letter from the dentist who examined it saying, hey, I've looked at everything, it looks like it's Gary? It's not an official report, it's just a letter.
Right. The letter was dated November 8th, 2018.
Okay, so as early as November, you had these remains, you knew it was Gary, and then we're waiting till June 2019 to issue your report. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. So, also, and you had brought this up with Ms. Frankish, the first part of your report, not the first part, the part where it says scene recovery introduction, that is verbatim copy and paste from Dr. Gooding's report.
That is correct.
Okay. Now, Dr. Gooding is a forensic anthropologist, and if you don't know, just say I don't know.
Yes, Dr. Gooding is a forensic anthropologist.
Okay. And you're a forensic pathologist.
That is correct. I am a forensic pathologist.
Dr. Gooding can't make determinations of cause and manner of death. Like you can.
Again, your question is difficult to answer, but I can say that the coroner consulted our office in order for me as the assigned forensic pathologist for this case to determine the cause and manner of death such that the coroner could sign the death certificate.
Okay. But the coroner had to wait for your report to come out to do that, correct?
The coroner is independent. The coroner consults us and can either agree or disagree with anything we say. They just consult us for an opinion.
So the coroner actually, she didn't need any permission from you. She could issue a death certificate for whatever she wanted to?
That is correct. Absolutely.
Okay, so if she testified earlier and was saying she had to wait on you, that's not exactly correct, right?
The coroner can choose or not choose to consult any forensic pathologist. The coroner, most wise coroners will consult a forensic pathologist to assist them in figuring out why someone died to get an accurate cause and manner of death. But does the coroner have to consult the GBI? No, of course not.
Okay. Now, the remains when they came in, I know you said you were there for photography, but for making your final determinations in the case, did you actually go through all of the remains?
Yes, I did.
You did? Okay. Okay. Moving to your report. You're unable to assess the location of the entrance room. You testified to that.
That is correct.
Okay. All right. You're unable to assess the range of fire.
That is correct.
Unable to assess the direction of a wound path.
That is correct.
And you are also unable to assess any type of diseases or anything like that due to the condition of the remains.
That is correct.
And also due to the condition of the remains, you couldn't perform any toxicology analysis either.
Again, we collected some skeletal muscle, and I do not believe it was tested. Certainly toxicology could have been if needed, but I do not believe any was done.
Who would make that determination? Obviously, you could have made that determination to do that type of testing, but could the prosecutor's office or the sheriff's office, could they have asked you to make that determination or do that test?
If someone had wanted some toxicology performed, they certainly could have called our office and requested some toxicology be performed on skeletal muscle, yes.
Okay.
But typically for gunshot wound, homicides, and suicides, our office typically does not perform any toxicology unless it's asked for by another interested party, whether it be the district attorney, the police, etc.
Okay. Moving on, I want to talk about cause of death for a little bit. Can you tell the jurors what hemorrhage means?
Hemorrhage is just bleeding. Anytime a blood vessel gets disrupted, blood will come out of the vessel and into the surrounding soft tissues.
So if, for example, I got shot and I'm bleeding, that would be a hemorrhage?
Yeah, typically if someone gets shot, there will be hemorrhage along the wound path of the bullet. That is correct.
Okay. And that's only true if the individual is alive at the time they are shot, correct?
In order for bleeding to happen, the heart has to be pumping. So yes, the person has to be alive for bleeding to occur.
All right. And the soft tissue that you examined where the bullet was found, you didn't see any evidence of hemorrhage?
It was too burned to assess for hemorrhage, like I mentioned in the report. But so the answer is yes, I did not see evidence of hemorrhage.
Okay. So with that, based on the logical assumption of what hemorrhaging is, if you didn't see any, you actually can't say to a medical certainty that the bullet entered that soft tissue while Gary Farris was alive.
That is correct.
Okay. Now, also going on to the wound path and the direction, if you can't determine the wound, we'll back up. Can you tell the jury what a wound path is? I don't know if Ms. Rankin, I didn't hear her say that.
A wound path is going to be what the bullet hits along the pathway from the entrance wound to either the exit wound or the lodgement of the bullet. For example, skin and soft tissue, skeletal muscle, bone, such as ribs, lungs, heart, aorta, soft tissue in the back, things of that nature. So the wound path is going to be a list of everything the bullet hit from when it entered the body to when it either exited the body or lodged somewhere.
And in this case, since you don't have a wound path, the only thing that you can say is that it's in that soft tissue. That is correct? You can't say that it hit any bone or skeletal structure or any internal or vital organs.
Right, yeah. The fragments that we examined were so burned that we could not see an entrance wound, a wound path. All we saw is the bullet.
Okay. So you would agree with me that if you can't determine what was hurt, then you can't say that that was the cause of death.
Again, if you're only examining the body, as a medical examiner, we have to get the investigation and the remains. So we have to look at the entire case and come to a reasonable conclusion. And it was a reasonable conclusion that a gunshot wound is what led to Mr. Farris's death. And that was the opinion, that was my opinion.
Okay. Even though you can't tell anybody of actually how he would have died, even if he was alive when he was shot.
That is correct.
Okay. Let's move to manner of death, because I thought that was interesting when you were talking with Mr. Frankish. So essentially, because I missed it, I know you've got accident, you've got homicide. What are the other two manners of death?
The four manners of death are natural death, accidental death, homicide, and suicide.
All right. So, you need some
Can
water?
I get some more water, please?
You've got a thing right there and some
Oh,
cups.
I didn't even see this. Thank you much. I did not see
All right,
it.
I'll let you go ahead and pour your cup.
All right, you can please continue.
All right, thank you. All right, so back to it again. Homicide, suicide, accident. What was the other one?
The four manners
Oh,
of death.
natural cause. Natural cause, homicide, suicide, accident. Is that the four?
Yeah. The four causes are natural, accident, homicide, and suicide. So if those are the four you're listed, yes, those are the four manners of death.
Okay. So you had testified on direct that natural cause, obviously there's a bullet there, so you don't think natural, right? And you have no organs to examine to see possible natural death, right?
That is correct.
All right. Suicide, people shoot themselves all the time, don't they?
Again, it's rare, but people do commit suicide.
Tell me this. I'm standing out and I get shot and I fall into a burn pile, would that be an accident? If I don't know who shot me?
Typically, we would call that a homicide.
True, because it's another person. Presumably that bullet came from somewhere, right? So that's why it'd be a homicide.
Again, I guess a better answer would be that you would have to know more about the circumstances. For instance, if someone was standing next to you and dropped a firearm, and the firearm discharged when it struck the ground and then struck you, then that we would call an accident. But accidental gunshot wounds are exceedingly rare. The vast majority of gunshot wounds are either homicide or suicide.
Okay, so that was a good example. So, you know, there's a gun there, it's dropped, shot, falls into the burn pile. So leaving accident in there as a manner, there's at least a theory behind it, right? Because you just told us that. It's not a theory you went with, but there's a possibility.
Can you restate your question?
I said, well, so both of them, like with suicide, we stated that you've done examinations where there's a bullet in somebody that committed suicide. So that's a plausibility, right?
Given what you're stating, yes, I would agree with that.
Okay. And accident, we came up with dropping a gun, accidentally getting shot. That'd be an accident. So possibility.
Okay. Yes.
All right. Suicide, accident, homicide. Let's see. Oh, natural causes. Well, the bullet kind of takes natural causes out of the way, right?
It could. Yes.
Okay. Unless, do you know, or did y'all get any medical records or anything obtained that showed that Mr. Farris had previously been shot? Like, years ago.
We did not, and furthermore, examining the remains, it looked like a fresh bullet, meaning that the bullet was not oxidized or had been in the tissue for very long, nor was there a fibrous capsule or such, or if it was a long-standing retained bullet. So it did not appear to be a retained bullet from a remote gunshot wound.
Okay.
That I could tell.
All right. And that's the bullet that you're referring to now?
That is correct.
Okay. Just hold with me one second, so I'm going through my notes. Okay, you're also aware that the crime lab that was tested, there were no accelerants found. Are you aware of that?
I do not know if I was aware of that. I may have heard that several years ago, but I'll believe you that no accelerants were found.
And there was no evidence discovered that there was any dismembering of the body or tending of the fire.
That is correct. I do not believe there was any evidence that the body was dismembered.
Okay. Based on the remains and the results in the examinations that you did, you cannot make a determination of how Mr. Farris got into the fire camp.
Again, as the medical exam, I guess the answer to your question is no, but with a qualification.
Okay, qualify.
The qualification is I am the medical examiner, so I'm examining the remains. Our office is not the investigating agency, so our office is not the one interviewing witnesses, determining exactly what happened. So we have to believe what the investigating agency's information that they give to us in order to complete our reports.
Okay. And without being able to do any kind of lung examination or carbon monoxide testing, you actually can't even make any type of determination of whether Mr. Farris was alive or dead when he went into the burn pile.
Yeah, there was no carbon monoxide or carboxyhemoglobin testing that was performed. And there were no lungs available for examination because all of the organs of the torso had burned up in the fire.
Okay. So, give me just one second. I always say it's one more and then it's not, so bear with me. So just explain to me that if you can't tell me, let me just read it, that'd be even easier. If you don't have the evidence to establish what caused Mr. Farris' death, okay? It's kind of a longer question. If you don't have it that established what causes death, and you can't determine how he got into the fire, then how do you know his death came about? So you have a basis to certify the manner of death.
Well, to answer your question is we have to couple the autopsy findings with the investigation, and the reasonable conclusion to make when we have burned remains with a bullet in the torso is that he was shot by another person and placed in the fire based on the investigation and based on the consistent findings that we saw at autopsy. That is why it is my opinion that the cause of death is the gunshot wound of the torso and the manner of death is homicide.
Now, even though you can't tell us any vital organs that were hit or actually what caused his death, right? You can't tell me he bled to death. I'll make it simple.
Well, I guess to answer your question, I'm going to have to kind of go on a tangent a little bit.
Well, no, we ain't going down that road. I asked you a very simple question. You cannot tell me he bled to death.
Based on autopsy, that is correct.
Okay. And you can't tell me any vital organ that was injured, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And you're aware that, I don't know if you, I know that Dr. Gooding did, they reassembled the skull and they found no evidence that Mr. Farris was shot in the head.
I was aware of that, yes.
Okay. So we got no internal organs, no head shot. You'll agree with me on that?
I will agree. I will agree with you with an explanation. You said there's no internal organs, but you failed to mention that all the internal organs have been burned up. So it's impossible to see a gunshot wound through an internal organ when the internal organ is burned up. So you appear to be saying that since there are no internal organs for you to examine, that there's no way that the internal organ was damaged or injured by the bullet. And so that's not necessarily a conclusion I'm willing to agree with, but you are correct when you say that there are no internal organ injuries and there is no hemorrhage because there's extensive postmortem thermal damage of these remains.
And you're right. The organs are burned up, and you can't do that. But that's not my job. You're the one testifying that he was killed and the manner of death is homicide. So I'm asking you how Gary Farris died.
Right.
How did the bullet kill him?
Right. It is my opinion that Mr. Farris was shot at least one time in the torso. One of those gunshot wounds of the torso was recovered in the burned remains based on what we found at autopsy, coupled with the investigation that we were told. Our office does not do investigation. So that's again, that's why we're trying the case. That's for the jury to decide. It is certainly my opinion and the opinion of the office that this is a gunshot wound of the torso, cause of death, and a homicide manner of death.
Can you say to a medical certainty that bullet actually even entered the body cavity?
Again, the answer to your question is no, with an explanation.
Well, I don't need his explanation unless Judge wants him to have it.
I'm sure Ms. Frank will ask.
No further questions.
Dr. Atkinson, please explain.
Well, like I've tried to explain before, we're not even saying that this is the only gunshot wound. If you read the report, it says at least one. Typically, about half of the gunshot wounds I examine exit the body. Typically, about half remain in the body. So I called the cause of death gunshot wound of torso, but I don't even know that this is a single gunshot wound. It could be multiple gunshot wounds. There could be multiple gunshot wounds that involved other bones or other soft tissue. But the reasonable conclusion to make was gunshot wound of torso because there's a bullet in the torso. I don't think that's an unreasonable conclusion to make.
What is peer review?
Peer review is when another doctor reviews the autopsy report to make sure the conclusions are sound and for, typos and other things that may show up and need to be corrected before the final report is released.
Was your report peer reviewed for this case?
Yes, it was.
I'm going to object to that, to the specific point that he stated that it was sort of make sure that it was a sound decision in his report. I would object to that, but that's just bolstering his opinion. We're trying to.
Where we go with the question.
I'm done, Judge. I was going to sit down.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
I was going to ask you more questions.
All right, you can sit down. Thank you, sir.
Oh, thank you.
All right, we got 2 minutes for another witness. All right, we will break for the day. Again, everything I've been telling y'all so far, please continue to follow those instructions. Don't talk to anybody about the case, look up anything about the case, or any of those things. All right, y'all have a good day. Tomorrow we will do our lunch off-site, and then we're going to break a little early on Wednesday, so I'll make sure whatever lunch we're getting, we get here sooner. All right, y'all can be excused. And then Thursday, we're doing at least 2.5 hours. We'll know more depending on me talking with the lawyers. But Thursday will be we'll break from noon to 2:30, at least.